Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, it's been a long 3 weeks, and I was hoping that I could wait and speak on the bill, but that was before this amendment. And since it is a referendum on the bill, I'm going to go ahead and speak. Nice to see all of y'all. I don't get down here much anymore. I can take one of these off. But I want to start by saying thank you, Senator from Beaufort. I mean that sincerely. I appreciate your years of hard work and perseverance. Thank you for caring enough to try and usher our state into the 21st century. Your patience here at the well and your passion for the people of South Carolina and compassion for the people is truly admirable and should challenge all of us to do and be better. I've taken copious notes, and I appreciate those of you who sent copies of the amendments up to the gallery so that I could participate and engage from up there. And what I'm about to say, not just about this amendment, but about the bill. What I'm about to say is not a reflection of you, Senator from Beaufort, or your efforts. It's not an indictment of anyone in particular, inside or outside of this chamber, and certainly not of those of us who have been fighting with you to legalize medical marijuana. But I'm not one to mince words, and let's be real. This amendment is just another effort to kill the bill. And the bill is already a much weaker version than the original proposal. In fact, it's already the most conservative bill in the country and a fraction of our original proposals. And yet, for the past 2 weeks, I've watched and listened as some of you try to dilute it even more. I've co-sponsored this bill each time Senator Davis, Senator from Beaufort, has sponsored it, has introduced it. But this time I'm listed last. And the reason that I'm listed last on this bill is because it took me a minute. It took me a minute to decide whether I wanted to even co-sponsor this version. I added my name to it again, reluctantly, in spite of my reservations, because if our efforts move the needle even slightly in a better direction, we'll significantly improve the quality of life for so many South Carolinians. So that means our big first step in the right direction is definitely one worth taking. For years, I've sponsored and advocated for each version of our medical cannabis bill. And for years, many of us have listened. I even in the House, listened to so much testimony from people who traveled from all over the state about the life-changing benefits of medical cannabis for South Carolinians who suffer. They continue to suffer in silence with cancer, PTSD, lupus, Crohn's, epilepsy, chronic pain, nausea, sickle cell anemia, and so much more. I've been listening intently up there to this debate from the gallery, trying to protect myself from COVID because there seem to be no governmental protections or compassion for people with chronic medical conditions like mine. To hear some of you bash and stigmatize those of us who benefit from medical marijuana hurts, because the reality is I wouldn't wish the pain and suffering I personally endured with sickle cell anemia. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And to think that some of us in this body would obviously have to feel that kind of pain firsthand, just to have an ounce of compassion and empathy for people across the state who struggle like I do. It's disheartening. So, for those who have expressed judgment, disdain, and disregard for anyone who would use marijuana for any reason, shame on you. Shame on us in this body. Will there be some who abuse or try to beat the system? Of course. That's the case for just about everything. There are already some who do it when it comes to opioids and narcotics and other regulated substances. This one is going to be no different. And while it's great that neither you nor anyone close enough to you knows what it feels like to have pain so intense, so excruciating and debilitating, that it can only be managed in a hospital. Please understand that some of us know that level of pain all too well. So well, in fact, that ER docs have asked when I've gone to the ER many times, Ms. McLeod, what's your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? Believe it or not, I didn't have the words or the numbers that were high enough to express it. But how can I prove that? How can I prove to a doctor or anybody else that I'm in that much pain? And if sickle cell wasn't a qualifying condition, am I limited to just opioids? To deny those of us who do know that kind of pain, one of the few remedies, natural remedies, that would allow us to live, work, and actively engage in life is a frightening misuse of our legislative powers. So while you may not know what it feels like to stare at a bottle of opiates and wonder whether or not your pain would finally stop. Big bottle. And wonder or not whether your pain would finally stop. Maybe it would if you took the whole bottle, because that's what the kind of pain you're feeling requires or demands. Maybe some of you know what it feels like to have one of your limbs hurt so badly you'd consider cutting it off if severing it would make the pain stop, just for a minute. So to hear some of you boast about never having used marijuana and assuring us that you never will speaks volumes about the level of ignorance and misinformation that's out there. Let me assure you, the majority of those who find hope and relief in medical marijuana aren't potheads. They aren't weed heads or criminals or characters in a Cheech and Chong movie. And quite frankly, referring to any South Carolinian who is reaching out to us for help in such a demeaning and derogatory manner is beyond offensive. The majority of us, believe it or not, are law-abiding citizens, taxpayers, voters. We're moms, dads, grandparents, aunts, uncles, daughters, sons. We're neighbors and constituents, parishioners and hardworking South Carolinians who love our state and are committed to doing our part to make it better. Just because stronger, more dangerous and addictive drugs are the preferred or acceptable prescriptions by law, obviously doesn't mean they're better or safer. Fortunately, there's another option. When it comes to marijuana, we become particularly interested, I see, in those who might drive while under the influence or work while under the influence. But truth is, they would be breaking the law, like too many other South Carolinians. Apparently, since South Carolina is 5th highest in the country for DUIs. And despite our DUI stats, alcohol has never been and probably never will be illegal. Neither have we penalized or vilified those who consume it. Yet we question or challenge the validity of practically every qualifying condition, because some of you want or seem to think that everybody who wants medical marijuana will lie, cheat, and steal to get it. Accusing South Carolinians of faking or embellishing symptoms, possibly using it for purposes that are outside of the prescribed conditions, is interesting. Actually, it's ironic. It's a better word. Hypocritical. That's a better word. Take Viagra, for instance. When I introduced the Viagra bill in 2016, I discovered that it was originally prescribed for high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. And it just happened that one of the side effects of Viagra was erections. But we didn't want to debate that. We didn't want to regulate that, because that was a welcome side effect. And nobody in this chamber or in this General Assembly wanted to talk about that. I am not aware of any attempts to regulate Viagra. But yet, when it comes to medical marijuana, we got folks who've come to this well and brought up blunts. Why would we bring blunts into the equation here on the floor? And I think there was a casual reference to smoking blunts, and it just happened to be connected to some folks who were on trial for murder. And it's like, wow, I guess that's why we're banning the smoking of medical marijuana in this bill. Not allowing it to be smoked is just another way of making an unnecessary distinction between those who smoke it and those who, if this bill passes, if this amendment fails and this bill passes, will legally consume it. Same cannabis, same marijuana, just like the same Viagra that's prescribed to treat high blood pressure and heart disease, but can also be used and abused by men because of its unintended but desirable side effects and the impact that it supposedly has on those who suffer with erectile dysfunction. And yet, I've never heard y'all say that Viagra and Cialis and similar drugs can only be used or prescribed for their originally intended purposes. Not sure why we're making so many distinctions, especially when the same rules ultimately apply to operating a motor vehicle, employment and workplace policies, school policies, and other venues where they would be prohibited. There's no safe harbor for those who abuse this or any other drug or consume it at a time or a place that would otherwise be prohibited. And yet, some of us continue to challenge the efficacy of medical cannabis when it comes to certain conditions. We spent the past few weeks out-experting the medical experts. I think the senator from Beaufort talked a bit about that yesterday. Or maybe it was today. My days are starting to run together. But we keep looking for and talking about conditions that we don't think should be on that short list of those medical cannabis will help. What's our end game? We could stay here from now until June, as the senator from Clarendon just talked about, showcasing our opinions about the efficacy of medical marijuana and the acceptable ways to consume it. Meanwhile, Viagra and Cialis can be ordered online without physically seeing a medical doctor or getting an official medical diagnosis. Imagine that. Why is that? And why isn't the same access being considered for medical marijuana? So if we truly want to make a difference in the lives of South Carolinians who are suffering, and we have a safe, effective antidote, why wouldn't we do everything we can to make it available and accessible? As someone who has had excruciatingly painful sickle cell crises, I can tell you firsthand that when that pain hits, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't think, you can't move. Everything hurts. You can't have the quality of life so many who have never experienced that kind of pain take for granted. If this bill had passed years ago, I may have been able to avoid so much of the pain I've endured because I was so afraid of taking too many of the opioids that my doctors prescribed. When my sons played college football and tore ACLs and LCLs and Achilles, I didn't want to take the chance of them becoming addicted to prescription opioids or narcotics that could have seriously hurt or killed them. Take a look at the size of this bottle, please, if you will. That's a big old bottle. I still got plenty left in it. These are prescription opioids. Think about how often these are prescribed in South Carolina. And think about how many South Carolinians have overdosed and died trying to manage their pain at home and their dosages at home. When I looked at this drug, here's how it's defined. Narcotic, used to treat moderate to severe pain. Controlled substance, High risk of addiction and dependence can cause respiratory distress and death when taken in high doses or when combined with other substances. Are we really going to make a dangerously strong, semi-synthetic opioid like this the only option suffering South Carolinians have? Over the years, I've been prescribed, I'm just speaking for me personally, I've been prescribed morphine, hydrocodone, Percocet, oxycodone, OxyContin, Dilaudid. When it comes to pain meds, you name it, and I've probably been prescribed it. Some cause nausea and other side effects. But then some of us are damned if we do and damned if we don't. Not taking anything to help alleviate the pain for many of us is simply not an option. When I think about passing a medical marijuana bill and what it would mean for my sister, a stage 4 breast cancer survivor, and others who beat cancer but still struggle with chronic nausea and other complications. I'm reminded that there are far more of us who struggle with chronic medical conditions than you may realize. So the question before us is, will we remain in the dark ages? Or will South Carolina become the 38th state by finally taking a bold, necessary step towards legalizing medical cannabis for those of us who need it and those of us who deserve a different, safer, effective option? Even Republican-controlled states like Alabama and now Mississippi have legalized medical marijuana. Like me, I'm sure all of you have gotten lots of emails from folks across the state asking, why is South Carolina so behind the curve on medical cannabis? The recurring theme of these emails is that it makes no sense that our doctors have to prescribe far more dangerous medications when no one has died. No one has died of a marijuana overdose. But more than 145,000 South Carolinians, or Americans, die every year from prescription opioids. Why is South Carolina pushing patients and doctors to the far more harmful option? DHEC has even referred to opioid misuses and overdoses in South Carolina as an epidemic. We know that marijuana usage actually decreases the dependence and likelihood of overdosing on opioids. And contrary to the misinformation that has been disseminated by those who oppose it, marijuana is not a gateway drug. Let me say that again for the folks in the back. Marijuana is not a gateway drug. It's a safer alternative. It doesn't have the addictive and overdosing propensities that opioids have. In fact, 37 other states, like I said, including Alabama and Mississippi, as late as last week, have legalized it. And at last check, an overwhelming majority of South Carolinians support the legalization of it. And let's be real, bipartisanship is hard to come by these days. But this is a bipartisan effort. Republicans and Democrats alike support this bill and this issue. Just take a look at those of us who have consistently sponsored and co-sponsored it. If passed, this bill would create one of the most strictly regulated medical marijuana programs in the country. And while I agree that legalization would be a big step in the right direction for South Carolinians, I'm concerned that over-regulating it will make medical marijuana too expensive for some South Carolinians and even deny or restrict access for the very people we're trying to help. And although we haven't spent much time on the economic impact of legalization, we know that passing this measure would generate millions in taxable revenue, if not more, and create thousands of jobs in its first year, providing a huge economic boost to our state's economy. And like it or not, medical marijuana is safe and effective, especially when compared to opioids. In 2019, South Carolina physicians prescribed more opioids than the national average. Medical marijuana should be taxed and regulated like any other prescription drug, not more and not less. Legalization is strongly supported by veterans groups who say the data shows suicides among combat veterans declines when they have access to medical cannabis. There's so many reasons to support this bill. Not only am I a proud co-sponsor, I've also introduced a bill to decriminalize it. Because I'll never forget what SLED and the South Carolina Sheriff's Association and other members of our law enforcement community said during a subcommittee hearing on my Disturbing Schools bill when I first introduced it in the South Carolina House. I think it was 2016, and I remember them pleading with us not to remove that tool from their toolboxes. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting request. So when I asked what they meant by that and what tool they were referring to, they simply said that law enforcement needed to hold on to the ability to arrest students while in school, and that if my bill passed, that tool or that ability would be removed from their toolboxes. Sadly, those officers and their organizations were well aware that the old Disturbing Schools law had already sent more than 30,000 South Carolina students into the school-to-prison pipeline, had already sent over 30,000 South Carolina students to DJJ. And the majority of those students were not engaged in criminal activities at school when they were arrested. Arguably, that's the same point they're making here when they voice their opposition to medical marijuana, saying that the legalization of medical marijuana will impact their ability to distinguish between the good guys and the bad guys. If that's their rationale or reasoning, I can't help but wonder why. Why then were those same law enforcement officers and agencies noticeably silent and low-key supportive of open carry? Because if there ever were bills that would impede law enforcement's ability to perceive an imminent threat or distinguish the good guys from the bad guys, it's open carry bills that have sailed through this chamber despite the opposition, despite the research, and with reckless disregard for those of us who will be negatively impacted. And for any law enforcement officer or elected official to sit in a medical cannabis hearing and mean mug struggling South Carolinians, Republicans and Democrats who travel from all over the state year after year, every time these bills are introduced, pleading with us for help and relief. That's what seems criminal. So I was curious about why medical marijuana ever became an illegal substance in the United States. And according to Britannica, the answer is simple, yet not surprising. The root of marijuana's illegality, Senator from Clarendon, is racism. In the 1930s, Harry Anslinger, head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, turned his battle against marijuana into an all-out war. His motivation seemed less about safety concerns, since the overwhelming majority of scientists he surveyed claimed the drug was not dangerous. Anslinger, however, was not deterred by the science or the scientists. So he sought a federal ban on marijuana and moved full speed ahead with his high-profile campaign that relied heavily on racism, even claiming that the majority of marijuana smokers were Black and brown people, and that marijuana had an effect on these degenerate races, such as inducing violence and causing insanity. He also said reefer makes darkies think they're good as white men. They're as good as white men. And went on to express his belief that smoking pot would result in white women having sex with Black men. Anslinger eventually oversaw the passage of the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, which effectively made the drug illegal across the United States, but was declared unconstitutional in 1969 and replaced by the Controlled Substance Act the following year. That legislation classified marijuana, as well as heroin, LSD, and others, as a Schedule I drug. Also not surprising is that racism was evident in the enforcement of the law as well. Those enforcement disparities are unfortunately still happening today. In 1996, California was the first state to decriminalize marijuana for medicinal purposes. By 2019, more than 30 U.S. states permitted some marijuana use, although it remained unlawful at the federal level. According to Britannica, African Americans in the early 21st century were nearly 4 times more likely than whites to be arrested on marijuana-related charges, despite both groups having similar usage rates. That's why I've introduced a bill that would take the question concerning whether to legalize medical and recreational marijuana to the people of South Carolina. Let's put the question on the ballot so we'll know once and for all where South Carolinians stand on this extremely important issue. We owe that to the people who continue to suffer without help and without hope. Before I take my seat, and I'm sure you're ready for me to do that, I just want to remind all of you of the words of Greenville native and civil rights icon, Reverend Jesse Jackson, who said, "Never look down on anybody unless you're helping them up." My prayer is not that you will come to know or understand or experience our pain firsthand. My prayer for all of you is that God will give you the courage, compassion, and empathy to do right by all of the people of South Carolina, regardless. That starts with tabling this amendment and passing a bipartisan medical marijuana bill that makes medical marijuana affordable and accessible to all of us who need it.